I want to have an open and honest conversation about the Georgia football offensive weapons, more specifically the pass catchers, so receivers and tight ends, although I will discuss running backs in this as well because it is about offensive weapons. It's actually the video game that's coming out that made me want to talk about Georgia's receivers. I saw that Dominic Lovett's the highest rated receiver for Georgia at an 86 overall. If you're not familiar with what that means, if you're a 99, that's the best you could possibly get. So Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, guys like that, Devontae Smith, they deserve those really, really high rankings. Wide receivers like that in college football. Just for an example. So Georgia's comes in as an 86. So let's talk about the receivers. Do they need elite weapons to win the national championship? At the end of the day, that is my question. And it's twofold. Does Georgia need elite weapons? And by elite, I mean premier football players. And you can't say that Georgia didn't do it without premier weapons on offense to win the national championships the last few years. They had Brock Bowers. George Pickens was available, although not the full version of George Pickens. He was available for that first championship season. And you add that with a lot of other talents like James Cook and guys like that. So you can't sit here and tell me that Georgia didn't have elite weapons on offense, even if they weren't necessarily at the wide receiver position. But it goes to show Brock Bowers is out the door now. He was that elite weapon for the last 3 seasons. He was a huge reason why Georgia's offense was as good as it was. Now you look at the numbers, Carson Beck and Georgia, they were fine without him when they didn't have him last year. And they were limited against Alabama with him and Lab McConkey. They were both limited, and they still managed to only lose that game by 3 points. So there is some data that tells us, hey, Georgia can still be a really good football team if they don't have those elite weapons, and they were missing their 2 best weapons, missing the real versions of them against Alabama, right? It's not talking about Alabama too much. It's about Georgia. I think when you look at the championship teams, they all have elite weapons, and it's this past Michigan team, that doesn't necessarily fall into that category, although I would consider a running back, even if there aren't a lot of goal line touchdowns, a running back that's scoring 20-plus touchdowns, I think in multiple seasons or at least close to that, is a weapon that you have to account for. And Michigan had a defense that you had to account for. So kind of the outlier in this conversation because Blake Corum does not necessarily match Brock Bowers, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, right? These teams that win national championships, they have bona fide studs. Now, part of the conversation is Carson Beck that stud, right? The offseason conversation has at least revealed that most people, or a lot of people in college football, do think he's that. They think he's the best quarterback in college football. He is the Heisman candidate, the leading Heisman candidate entering this 2024 season. So maybe he is Georgia's elite weapon. But when we talk about the weapons on the outside, and you go down the list, ranging from Dominic Lovett to Benjamin Urasek to Trevor Etienne, are they good enough? Is this group of weapons good enough to do it for Georgia? And I think as a collective, the answer is yes. Is there a guy that is going to be a game breaker, an X factor? Is there going to be a guy that on a fourth and whatever it was against Ohio State, make sure he doesn't go out of bounds? Is there going to be a guy against Auburn who gets 2 one-handed catches in a row and scampers off for a touchdown and helps Georgia win a very tight game against a rival? That's the question, because it's those types of players that can really help take a team to the next level. Ryan Curley from Dawg post, I want you to be a next level Georgia fan and sign up for the newsletter. I have that linked in the description down below. Media days in a few days, 3 days away. I'll be on a plane. 2 days away. I'm recording this the night before, so 2 days away from going to Dallas and checking out the season. We're not going to talk to Georgia's offensive weapons there because it'll be Malachi Starks and Micah Williams. We will get to talk to Carson Beck, and that's a question I'm going to have for him when we get there. Like, seriously, man. I mean, it's a question. If I don't get a chance to ask Carson this in Dallas, I'm definitely going to ask him this during fall camp, during fall practice, when we get to actually talk to them again. And I'm going to be like, hey, Carson, seriously, man, how good is this wide receiver room? Just like, you don't, I know you're not going to tell me, but just like nod if there's a guy that's just really balling out. Dominic Lovett has been people's answer for that, right? You go to the spring, talk about how he dominated. You watch G-Day, dominated. Really, really, really good. I've never viewed Dominic Lovett as a super dominant wide receiver. And maybe that's what's going to happen. And sometimes weapons have to leave for a new one. I keep saying the word weapon. Sorry if you don't like that. A player has to leave for another player to shine and rise to the occasion. And you're getting that Lab McConkey out the door. You're getting that Brock Bowers out the door. There's going to be an opening for a lot of offensive production for Georgia and for Carson Beck to distribute this football too. You add Trevor Etienne into the conversation, and it gets people really excited that he can be a DeAndre Swift-like back. And like Dean and I had a conversation in the car in Athens the other day, you plug in DeAndre Swift onto this football team, and you start to feel pretty good because that 2019 team, where he was the lead back, is not as good as this 2024 team. It is not as good as the 2023 team. It's just not. And you saw him get 1,200 yards. And he was a guy that would be considered an elite offensive player. I think that if you were to make the argument that Georgia doesn't have good enough weapons to win, or they don't have as good weapons as they've had in the past, when you think about having Bowers and A.D. Mitchell and Pickens and James Cook and guys like that, guys that I believe, if they haven't already been, are going to be successful NFL players because they are that good at football, you can make the argument that they don't have anybody as good as that. And I would say you're right. I would say you're right. They don't. I don't think that Georgia has an offensive player that's as good as those guys. At least we haven't seen them do that yet, and I got to see it. I think Oscar Delp is really, really good. A flaw with the video game to show you. And also, if you've made it this far in the video and you haven't skipped out on me yet, seriously, I'm considering doing this. Tell me if you want me to play as Georgia on the college football video game and do some sort of review for you guys and talk about it. I will do a video about the college football video game. If you want, I have it pre-ordered. I'm definitely excited about that, and we can talk about that. But showing that Oscar Delp is not a 90 overall, right? He hasn't played his way into being a 90 overall. Shows me the flaws with that video game already. You look at a lot of the player overalls. And I think Oscar Delp's a great player. You see him out there one-handed catching it. You see him out there hurdling. You see him out there bulking up and gaining weight and blocking. The assumption is that Georgia's guys are going to be really, really, really good. And I agree. My counter-argument to Georgia doesn't have this Brock Bowers type of player on their offense. They don't have a George Pickens. They don't have a Nick Chubb type of player on their offense. How are they going to compete for a national championship? I would say the counter-argument is the depth of variety that they have. Dominic Lovett is a shifty wide receiver that can do a lot of things on the inside and can move outside if you need him to. Colby Young is a guy they brought in from Miami that is going to be a jump ball guy that you see has some chemistry with Carson Beck already, which I thought the same thing about him and Dominic Lovett a year ago. You've got a Dylan Bell, who maybe I should have brought him up earlier in this video because I think that the potential is there for Dylan Bell to be the type of player that we talked about. It's just a matter of if he's going to get the ball enough. And I do think he does get the ball a little bit more this coming season as a third-year player, as a guy that's trusted in this Georgia offense. But the truth is that Georgia doesn't have as good of offensive weapons as they've had in the past. They've just got more of them, and maybe they've got a blend of them that gels together. Now, maybe Trevor Etienne is a little bit better than I'm giving him credit for, but we haven't seen DeAndre Swift. We've seen flashes, but if he really was that, my question is to Florida, and maybe Florida is just not smart. Maybe Billy Napier's offense was just shouldn't have been doing what it was doing, and they're losing a lot of football games. If he really was that, why wouldn't he have dominated that backfield? That's my question. Why should he dominate a Georgia backfield if he couldn't at Florida? It's a legitimate question that I've really conjured up recently. Now, I do think that he's really good, and I think when you talk about Roderick Robinson behind him, I think it's exciting. I think that Georgia's got all sorts of weapons. Having Benjamin Urasek and Oscar Delp as your tight end 1s and 2s with serious depth behind it matters. And having an elite thrower of the football, which is what they have in Carson Beck, and I do think he's going to take a step forward, That tells me that Georgia does have a capable offense. And like I said, they don't have those elite weapons. I still think that they could be a 45 points per game offense. A lot of that lies on Carson Beck and distributing the football and the trust that I have in the coaching staff at Georgia. But the answer to the question is they don't have a guy like that. Yet. They might. It could be Dominic Lovett. It could be Dylan Bell. But they don't have a dominating offensive player yet. Maybe not. We'll see. What do you think? Thanks for watching.